The sun had just dipped behind the distant mesas, casting long shadows over the dusty land. The desert air was cool now, and the evening sky glowed in shades of pink and orange. On the outskirts of the small settlement, a lone figure rode slowly along a narrow trail. He was a cowboy, strong and rugged, with a face hardened by years of hardship. He moved quietly, his horse steady under him, and his eyes always scanning the horizon. People in the town knew little about him. They called him tough and stubborn. Some said he had lost too much to care about anyone else. Others whispered that he preferred his own company. And perhaps he had good reason. Tonight, as he rode past the edge of a rocky hill, he noticed a small wisp of smoke rising into the twilight. Curious, he slowed his horse. The smoke came from a cabin tucked away behind a few mesquite trees. It was a modest home, simple but well kept. The smell of firewood and cooking reached him, a warm and inviting scent that felt almost foreign after a long day of travel and work. He hesitated. Loneliness had been his companion for many years, and it had taught him caution. Still, something about that smoke drew him closer. As he reached the cabin, the door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was not young, but her presence commanded attention. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and full of life. Yet there was a softness in her smile. She was an Apache widow, having lost her husband not long ago. She carried herself with quiet strength, moving with the grace of someone who knew both hardship and resilience. Without a hint of fear, she looked directly at the cowboy and said, "Come inside." The words were simple, yet they held a warmth he had not felt in years. He studied her for a moment, unsure of what to do. Trust did not come easily to him, not after all the years of solitude and loss, but the inviting tone in her voice and the gentle curl of her lips eased some of his hesitation. He nodded slowly, dismounting his horse and tying it to a nearby post. His boots crunched softly on the dry earth as he walked toward the cabin. Inside, the cabin was cozy. A fire crackled in the small hearth, and the room smelled faintly of herbs and cooked food. The widow gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit," she said. He obeyed, grateful for the warmth that reached his cold hands. She handed him a bowl of stew. It was simple fare, but hearty and delicious. As he ate, he could not help but notice the care she had taken in preparing it. They spoke cautiously at first, exchanging polite words about the weather, the land, and the small chores each had performed that day. But slowly, the conversation grew deeper. The widow asked him about his travels, his work with cattle, and the life he had led. He answered carefully, revealing little, but he felt a strange comfort in her presence. She did not press him too hard, and that made it easier to share a little more. For the first time in years, he felt understood without judgment. Night after night, the cowboy returned. Each evening, he would find himself at her door, drawn by the warmth of the fire and the quiet companionship she offered. Sometimes, they would sit in silence, simply listening to the crackle of the fire or the distant sounds of the desert. Other times, they shared stories of family, of past hardships, of small triumphs that had shaped their lives. With every visit, the cowboy felt the walls he had built around himself begin to crumble. The widow, too, found comfort in his visits. She had been lonely since her husband's death, and though she had always been strong, the nights had often been cold and quiet. His presence brought a sense of safety and calm that she had not realized she missed. She admired his quiet strength and resilience, the way he carried himself even after years of solitude. He listened without judgment, and that alone was enough to make her feel valued and understood. The cowboy began to help her with chores around the cabin. He would chop wood for the fire, fetch water from a nearby well, and repair fences on the small plot of land she maintained. She taught him how to recognize the tracks of animals, how to move quietly through the desert, and how to find water when it seemed impossible. In turn, he shared some of his knowledge about riding, tracking cattle, and surviving harsh conditions. Slowly, they became partners in the simple tasks of daily life, learning from one another and growing closer in ways neither had expected. One evening, as the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, the widow handed him a small bundle of dried herbs. "For your horse," she said with a smile. He looked at her, surprised, and felt a warmth in his chest. She had noticed the care he took in looking after his horse, the animal that had been his companion for so many years. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than words could express. Their companionship became a rhythm, a steady presence in both their lives. Even the local townspeople began to notice the cowboys' nightly visits. Some whispered, wondering why such a strong, solitary man would seek out the company of a widow. Others admired the quiet connection between the two, recognizing the respect and care they showed one another. But the cowboy and the widow paid little attention to gossip. They had found something rare, a bond built on trust, understanding, and shared experiences. Then, one night, a sudden danger arrived. A group of bandits passed through the area, seeking to steal livestock and supplies. The cowboy, ever vigilant, noticed them approaching the cabin. He acted quickly, moving quietly to a vantage point where he could protect the home. When the bandits came too close, he confronted them with courage and skill, warning them off with a firm voice and steady aim. The widow watched from inside, her heart pounding with fear and admiration. She realized that not only did she trust him with her life, but he had become an essential part of her world. After the danger had passed, the cowboy returned to the cabin, brushing dust from his coat. She greeted him with a relieved smile. Neither spoke much at first, but the firelight reflected in their eyes told the story of shared relief and gratitude. That night, they sat closer to the fire, the unspoken understanding between them growing stronger. The cowboy felt a warmth in his chest he had not known for years, a sense of belonging that he had almost forgotten existed. As the nights continued, their bond deepened. They laughed together, sometimes at small mistakes or the unexpected challenges of daily life. They shared quiet moments of reflection, talking about dreams they had once held and the lessons life had taught them. The widow learned to trust, not only in his strength, but in his gentle nature. The cowboy learned that opening his heart did not make him weak, it made him human. By the end of that season, the cowboy was no longer just a solitary figure wandering the desert. He had become part of a life filled with warmth, companionship, and mutual respect. The widow had found more than a protector. She had found a friend, a confidant, and someone who valued her for who she was. Together, they had created a small world of understanding and care, a place where past sorrows were acknowledged but no longer defined the present. And so, night after night, the cowboy continued to visit the widow's cabin. Each evening brought new stories, shared laughter, and quiet moments by the fire. The simple words, "Come inside," had opened a door not just to a home, but to a connection that would shape the lives of both. In the harsh and unforgiving desert, they had found warmth not just from the fire, but from each other. The days passed slowly, as they always did in the wide desert plains. But for the cowboy and the Apache widow, each day carried a quiet rhythm of life and companionship. The mornings were often spent tending to small chores. The cowboy would repair fences, check the horses, and help with whatever tasks needed doing, while the widow prepared the cabin, mended clothes, or gathered herbs from the nearby land. Though their work was simple, it brought them together, offering time to speak quietly or share a small laugh. Evenings remained their most treasured moments. After a long day under the harsh sun, they would sit together near the fire in the cabin, letting the warmth chase away the cold of the night. Sometimes they shared meals, sometimes stories, and sometimes simply the silence of shared presence. In that silence, They had learned to understand each other in ways words could never fully capture. The cowboy had learned that strength was not just in facing danger, but also in showing care. The widow had learned that trust, once given, could bring comfort that softened the edges of grief. One evening, as the sky turned a deep purple and the first stars appeared, the widow looked at the cowboy with a gentle expression. "You have changed since you first came here," she said softly. "I can see it in your eyes. You are no longer just a man who walks alone." The cowboy chuckled, a low sound that carried more warmth than he had intended. "And you, too," he replied. "You have opened your home and your heart, and I don't know how to say it, but it feels different here now." They both understood without needing to speak. Their companionship had become something more profound than friendship. It was a bond that had been forged through shared stories, quiet nights, and mutual respect. Neither had planned for it, yet it had grown naturally, as inevitable as the desert sunrise. The cowboy no longer feared showing his softer side, and the widow no longer faced the nights alone. Together, they had created a world of small comforts and deep understanding. The town around them began to notice the changes in the cowboy. He was no longer the distant figure who avoided all interaction. He helped neighbors when needed, offered guidance to younger ranchers, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that reflected the lessons he had learned from his time with the widow. Some of the townsfolk whispered about the unusual friendship, noting the bond between a rugged cowboy and a strong Apache widow. But those whispers did not trouble them. They had found something in each other that mattered far more than gossip. As the season shifted toward the colder months, new challenges appeared. One bitter night, a heavy snowstorm swept through the region. The wind howled across the mesas, and the desert became a treacherous landscape of ice and snow. Roads became impassable, and the threat of isolation grew. The widow's small cabin was vulnerable, and for the first time, she worried about facing the harsh elements alone. The cowboy acted quickly, gathering supplies and reinforcing the cabin as best as he could. Together, they blocked cracks against the wind, prepared extra firewood, and made sure the horses were safely sheltered. During those long, freezing nights, they huddled close to the fire, sharing warmth and whispered conversations. The storm raged outside, but inside, the cabin felt safe and secure. They had become each other's protection, a team capable of surviving whatever nature might bring. During one particularly quiet night, with the storm subdued but the air still icy, the cowboy and the widow shared a moment of reflection. "I never thought I could feel like this again," he admitted, his voice low and steady. "I thought the desert and solitude were all I would ever know. But now it feels like there is more to life than just surviving." The widow reached out and placed her hand on his. "Life is meant to be shared," she said simply, "and I am glad it is with you." Their bond deepened even further after that winter. The cowboy no longer felt like an outsider wandering through the harsh land, and the widow no longer felt the emptiness that had haunted her since her husband's death. Together, they explored the desert, learned new ways to gather food and herbs, and strengthened the small farm that surrounded the cabin. They laughed at the mistakes they made and celebrated the small victories of each day. Each shared experience became a thread that wove their lives tightly together. One afternoon, as they worked to mend a fence near the cabin, a stranger appeared on the trail. He was a traveler, seeking directions to the settlement. The cowboy greeted him cautiously, while the widow prepared a small meal for the visitor. As they spoke with him, both realized how much they had grown together. They could work as a team, communicate silently, and act with mutual understanding. The stranger noticed the harmony between them and left with respect, commenting on the unusual but admirable partnership he had witnessed. It was during moments like these that they realized their companionship had not only changed their own lives but had begun to influence those around them. They were no longer simply two individuals surviving separately. They had become a pair whose presence brought stability and hope to their small corner of the desert. And though they had endured hardships and faced dangers, they had done so together, learning to trust and rely on one another. Then came a more personal challenge. Memories from the widow's past resurfaced. Stories of her late husband, the life she had shared before his death, and the traditions she had upheld weighed heavily on her heart. She feared that accepting companionship from the cowboy might somehow dishonor her husband's memory. Yet the cowboy, sensing her hesitation, never pushed. He showed patience, respect, and unwavering support. Slowly, she began to see that the bond they shared did not erase the past, but honored it by allowing her to continue living fully. One night, as the moon shone brightly over the desert, they sat outside the cabin, watching the stars. The quiet was filled with the gentle sounds of the wind, the distant call of an owl, and the soft crackle of the fire nearby. The cowboy turned to the widow and said, "I never believed I could find peace or friendship like this. But here, with you, I feel something I never thought I would feel again. I feel at home." The widow smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "And I feel safe and valued," she replied. "You have brought joy back into my life, and I am grateful." Their relationship became a balance of strength and compassion, of understanding and patience. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, to share tasks without words, and to comfort each other in times of fear or doubt. The cabin, once a quiet place of solitude for the widow, became a home filled with laughter, warmth, and shared purpose. And for the cowboy, the harsh desert no longer felt lonely. It was a place where he had found friendship, trust, and a sense of belonging he had never known. As the story of their lives together unfolded, it became clear that their bond was not built on grand gestures or dramatic events, but on the steady rhythm of everyday life. The way the cowboy tended to the fire when the widow's hands were cold, the way she smiled at his small successes, the quiet support they gave each other through storms and hardships, all of these moments added up to a profound and lasting connection. In time, the townsfolk accepted their partnership. No longer whispered about with suspicion, their relationship became a quiet example of respect, trust, and loyalty. The cowboy and the widow continued their nightly rituals. Meals by the fire, shared stories, and long walks under the star-filled sky. They had found a life together that was richer and more fulfilling than either had expected. And in the vastness of the desert, they had discovered something rare. Companionship, built on understanding, trust, and the gentle power of shared humanity. And so, night after night, the cowboy and the widow continued their journey together, facing the world with resilience, warmth, and care for one another. Their lives, once marked by solitude and loss, were now filled with connection and hope. Through simple acts of kindness, shared labor, and quiet moments by the fire, they had found what many spend a lifetime searching for: a true and lasting bond. In the unforgiving landscape of the desert, they had created a sanctuary of trust, understanding, and love, a testament to the strength of human connection and the enduring power of companionship.